Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our December curriculum meeting. Um, as you know, we normally meet the second Tuesday of the month, and the meeting was moved up to coincide with the board reorganization meeting and workshop meeting. We also had changed the time. Our time that we had is 5 to 6:30, but because the content's only going to take about an hour, we moved the time from 5:30 to 6:30. So we have in our committee, we have Ms. Mel, Dr. Miner, Dr. Winters, um, Ms. Wilson should be coming shortly. Ms. Devlin's on our committee, but she's unable to be here in person this evening. And Dr. Hemberger on Zoom. So I'd like to welcome our committee and also all of the people who are in person and the people who are on Zoom. So we have just two things this evening. Dr. Winters is going to do a special recognition for one of our teachers, Mrs. Karen D'Annunzio. Um, he's going to recognize her for a conference presentation. He'll tell you more about that. And then the other thing is Mr. Campbell and Mrs. Harris will be presenting some proposed changes in our graduation requirements. Now, I heard about this from Dr. Martin a few days ago and also Dr. Winters. And I am really excited about these changes proposed changes. They'll talk to you in detail about it. But what I'm excited about is that I think it's going to really help us with our students, to get more of our students graduating. We've talked about this in a couple of meetings, the concerns about the graduation rate. And what they came up with, I think it's awesome. And it's going to still maintain our high standards, our academic rigor, but it's going to give students some opportunities. And I think, I was thinking about years ago, you can go out and get jobs without a high school diploma. Like many jobs, you need a skill, a trade, you need, professional certifications and things. But I was really amazed at how many jobs that don't require skills, but you must have a high school diploma. So, we want to send our students out there equipped to be successful. So I'm excited about this. And so they'll be presenting that. So we'll start with Dr. Winters and special recognition.
Thank you, Dr. McClendon. Very, very excited tonight to recognize Karen D'Annunzio, our literacy coach in the district. She's been selected to present at the upcoming Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development Conference, ASCD, in June of this year. Her presentation is called Instructional Learning Visits, Building a Collaborative, Sustainable Culture for All. And it's really very exciting. Karen was slated to present at this conference last year in person in California, and the conference was canceled due to the pandemic. And they're doing it virtually this year. And there were a select number of people from across the country that were chosen to present in the conference, and Karen was one of them. And so I think it's just fantastic. It speaks to her talents as a literacy coach. It's a great recognition, not only for Karen individually, but for the district as a whole. And so certainly proud of Karen for that accomplishment, and certainly glad that she's able to present and represent Exeter positively in that regard. So moving forward, I'd now like to turn things over to Mr. Tom Campbell and Mrs. Dawn Harris, who will present and share with you information regarding graduation requirements. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Dr. McClendon and the committee for having us. As you mentioned, we've been looking at issues related to our graduation rate, and that's not a simple issue and has multiple root causes. We've been looking at additional supports that we're putting in. We're looking at expanding internship opportunities, curriculum revisions. But one of the topics that came up in our work was looking at patterns of seniors who were hitting courses that were required that they were not succeeding in or were not relevant to their post-secondary plans. And that's what really led us to taking a look at graduation requirements. In doing that, we stepped back and started with the question of what should our graduation requirements do for our kids? And really we came back to, if you could advance that, Mr. Way. What we came back to is that we really need to give each student an opportunity to chart a path that serves their own post-secondary goals. So kids need to be looking at what they want to do after high school and pursuing that from the minute they walk into high school. We also talked about a couple of complementary values that are important to us throughout all of this, one of which is rigor. Our kids, thank you. Our kids are entering a competitive workforce and world of college applications, and they need to be ready for that. But we believe that rigor comes from within the classroom. It's more about how kids learn, not what they learn. Engagement's an important part of that, and cognitive engagement is really the heart of learning and a prerequisite to rigor. And that really comes from relevance. And that's what kids need to be pursuing. They need to be pursuing things that are important to them and their longer term goals. What makes all that possible is good advisement. If we have 300 kids in a class pursuing individual post-secondary goals, they need to have counselors that are putting them on those respective paths. And we know that in the last decade and even more, the college and career readiness expectations have become more complicated, and our counselors are really stepping up to serve that. They have become much more well-versed in some of the nuances of college applications, and they also understand some of the complexities of having students move into trades and the workforce. And this also speaks to another value that we've been emphasizing here at Exeter, and that's equity. We know that equal treatment of students is not equitable, and what kids need, we really need to be looking at what individual students need and serving those individual needs. So currently, our graduation requirements are these: 4 years of English, 4 years of social studies, 4 years of math, 4 credits of science, 2 arts and humanities credits, 2 credits of wellness and fitness, and 5 elective credits to bring us to a total of 25. These were adopted about 5 years ago. Previously, there was 4-4-3-3 requirement, meaning 4 English, 4 social studies, 3 math, and 3 science. So to go back to some of our goals here, promoting flexibility and pursuing those individual post-secondary goals, I think it's really important to recognize that we've got a wide spectrum of students in Exeter. We've got high achieving students, majority of whom are going on to post-secondary education. About 60% of our kids are going off to 4-year schools. About another 15 are heading off to trade and 2-year schools. We've got students that have particular areas of focus, and I think that's most notable in some of our students that pursue the arts, whether they be in the fine arts classrooms or the music, or whether they're down in our STEM labs, or whether they're students that go off to BCTC. We also have students that are at risk, who school is challenging for them, and we've worked to support them throughout their careers, but they are really hitting the point where they are looking to get out of classrooms. To really make this all possible, it goes back to that value, that support I mentioned earlier of academic advisement. We need to make sure that we have counselors who are helping students pursue those individual pathways. And that's where that flexibility becomes important. As of now, even under our current requirements, the majority of students don't worry about the graduation requirements. Most of our students are not picking classes because they think that they need those particular classes in order to get their high school diploma. They're picking those classes because they have post-secondary goals, and they're picking classes that are going to help them get into the college they want to get into. So I think that's really important, that we realize that most students don't worry about graduation requirements now. They worry about the college and their post-secondary plans, which is really where we want them to end up. We also know that we have challenges with constrained schedules. And examples of that are when students perhaps fall behind in a credit. They fail a course, and now they've got to get caught up. So they can do that. We can get that in their schedule, and our counselors are very good at doing that, but that creates a constraint for those students. We also know that students who need additional supports, because we want to avoid that failure from the start. So we have classes that provide additional supports for students, but those additional supports don't necessarily meet particular graduation requirements. So that creates a constraint for students. And I think a classic example of a constraint that students have is BCTC. We've got one of the best career and technical centers in the state, and those students spend about half of their day there, which means that they have very limited time, and we have to be very methodical about what classes they're taking back at the high school in order to meet those graduation requirements. So all of those, that wide variety of kids are all capable of getting a high school diploma, and every single one of them deserves it. And that's why it's important that we make sure that we have that flexibility so that those students can pursue their individual goals. We took a look at what other schools are doing as well. We examined total credits within the majors, and also there's a variety of other catch-all categories. So we took a look, and just as an overall picture, Exeter is in line with what other schools are doing, but we are a bit of an outlier. And when we took a look at total credits in the county, 8 of the 18 schools in the county require 24. That's pretty much the norm. There's some that are fewer. In fact, I just found out today Wilson's looking to drop theirs down to 22. There's a couple that are above 24, 25, but 24 is the norm. We also took a look at the top 15 schools in the state in the U.S. News and World Report rankings. And of those top 15, really there's only about 11 that are true public schools to compare to. The others are competitive or application, like your Mastermans and your Downingtown STEMs. But of those 11 top schools, 7 of them had less than 24 credits as a requirement. In fact, your Harriton and Lower Merion dropped it down to a state minimum of 21. So I guess what we get from that is the number of total credits is not a reflection of how competitive or how well prepared your graduates are. And in fact, if you take a look at our graduates, we have very few that struggle to hit our current minimum requirement. Within the majors, what we see is that of the 11 of the 18 schools in the county have a 14 credit major. So that would be something like this: 4 years of English, because everybody's got to have 4, and then 4 of something else and 3 of 2 others. So of the math, science, social studies, and English, 14 credits is the norm. 2 schools require 15 credits, and then there's 4 plus Exeter that have this 4x4 credit requirement. In fact, today, again, I just learned that Wilson is going to be dropping theirs. They may be down to 13. They've got an interesting way of calculating some of those requirements. Outside of the Berks County, looking at those top schools in the state again with the U.S. News and World Reports, what we see is that none of them have a 4x4 requirement. And I think that's reflective of that flexibility and acknowledgement that students should be pursuing their individual paths and looking at their post-secondary goals as opposed to trying to tick off requirements within the school district. Here's what we're proposing. We're proposing that these take effect for the class of 2021. And we would only permit changes to student schedules within that class if there were immediate needs with their graduation requirements, and those changes would have to be counselor or administrator initiated, because their students really do have paths and they have a plan for graduation, but certainly a few of them are going to need some flexibility, and we want to support them. So we're looking at 4 English credits, 3 social studies, 3 math, 3 science, and then 1 additional social studies, math, or science. So what we're looking to do is put us in line with many of our peer schools and top achieving schools in the state, and looking at a 14 credit major requirement. The arts and humanities requirement is there. Quite honestly, no student has trouble achieving that because many of our electives cover it. It happens to be a 2 credit minimum in Pennsylvania. So every school has that. Fitness and wellness, we're looking to reduce to 1. We think those are important, and that's required by the state. But we also think that the overall philosophy of having students have that flexibility to pursue their individual paths is important. And then 7 elective credits brings us to a total of 24 credits. Again, that puts us in line with what other schools are doing and really continues to give students a lot of flexibility. This same information is here on this table, just presented all together. We see the state requirements on the left-hand column with the 4-3-3-3 for the majors, the 2 arts and humanities credits, the PE credit for a minimum state requirement of 21 credits. Currently, Exeter has the 4x4 with the other requirements taking them up to 25. And then our proposal on the right, which is 4-3-3-3 plus 1, the 2 arts and humanities, the PE, and then 7 electives. This really brings us back to where we started here. And I think this is important to reiterate. I can't emphasize it enough. Our kids deserve an opportunity to chart a path for themselves that serves their post-secondary goals. Our kids come to school so they're prepared for adult life. We value rigor, and that's what happens in the classroom. It's based on how we learn, not what we learn. It's engagement, and that's really the heart of learning. And that means that things need to be relevant and related to what our kids want to achieve after high school. And they need good advisement, which they have. Our counselors are ready to put them on those individual paths and help them with what they need to cultivate and curate their own college applications to maximize their opportunities for admission. And it goes back to another important value that we have with equity. And Ms. Harris, you want to comment a little bit on that, because that fits in with some of our larger goals.
Thank you very much. So my role in this process really was to assess equity and access. I worry sometimes that people use equity as a catchphrase. I never want that to happen at Exeter. So when I use that word equity, I'm really talking about whether or not this framework creates access for all students at all levels, to be able to chart their own path toward their post-secondary goals. And so when I look at this framework, what I see is that our highest achieving students have that opportunity to continue to max out their schedules as much as they want, and they can refine their program even more toward their expertise in their areas of talent. For our average achieving students, this gives them the opportunity to explore and discover their passions and figure out what they want to do as a post-secondary goal, and then chart their course accordingly. And for our lowest students, or our students who struggle the most, this gives them the opportunity to have all the time that they need for repetition of material and content so that they can reach their goals within that 4-year framework. So when I look at this, I see a win, win, win across all 3 of those categories, and that's equity. So I think this is the kind of framework that our district is really looking to adopt in order to create those opportunities for all students.
If the committee has any questions, we'd be happy to take those.
Tom, I have a
I'd
question.
just like to make a comment. And, I would really want to thank Mr. Campbell and Dr. Winters and Mrs. Harris. I know they spent a great deal of time researching credits in other school districts. We had a number of very rigorous conversations about our purpose and our goals for our students. And I really do want to thank them and their respective teams for their very hard work in putting this presentation together. I think it reflects deep thinking and, really a desire to serve the best interest of our students.
Tom, I have a question, unless other members of the committee have a question.
No, go ahead, John.
Tom, you said that at Exeter, about 60% of seniors go on to college. Did I get that right?
4-year schools, correct.
Yeah. How does that compare with the other schools in the county?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure exactly what those other profiles are off the top of my head.
Is that something that you could get?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just want to say, we are going to move this into for a vote at our next our meeting that we have on December 15th, the school board meeting. Mr. Campbell, are you going to say anything in the workshop meeting about this? I was thinking that at least that one slide that shows where Exeter is now and where, the proposed changes.
I'd be happy to speak to anything you want in the workshop.
Well, since not all the board members are here for this meeting, and so that, they,
Certainly.
I like that. You don't have to do the whole presentation over, that's not what I'm suggesting, but especially what the changes that we're going to be asking them to vote on.
Certainly.
Mm-hmm. And I wrote that, thank you all, for doing this. Like I said, when I start off, I'm really, excited about that. And Mrs. Harris, you really hit it with what you said about equity. I wrote it down. Equity is access and opportunity for all students. And this really does, address that. So I do appreciate what you've done.
Dr. McClendon, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is there time for a question? I was just wondering, whether any of the changes that, we're recommending here will need to be reflected in district policy anywhere. Does our policy currently require, for instance, 25 units or 25 credits for graduation, or is that, has anybody looked at our policy, our district policy, to see whether or not we'd have to make any changes there?
Dr. Hamburger, this is Dr. Minor. Yes, we did look at district policy. What our policy says is that the board will adopt the graduation requirements. And so, that's why this would require a board vote on December 15th. And then those requirements are laid out in the Soaring Eagle document, which is our program planning document. So the policy just states that the board will adopt the requirements, and then presumably they stay the requirements until the board adopts a different set of requirements.
Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from anybody in the audience or on Zoom?
Maybe one more question, Dr. McClendon, Dave Hamburger.
Good.
For the students who are attending our career technical programs, do they have an identical kind of a requirement? Or I'm assuming that a large part of their program is not necessarily there to fulfill the academic requirements. How do they get 24 which credits what appears to be largely academic, or can they fulfill that with their current program?
That's a great question. And it's actually, you're hitting on one of the challenges that we have with a constrained schedule. It's not actually the number of credits that our BCTC students have trouble achieving. In fact, in many cases, they graduate with some of the most credits because their schedules are absolutely full. What they have trouble achieving are all the specific requirements within the 24 or 25 credits that is the total amount. So that's where many schools, including Exeter, but particularly places like Exeter who have that 4x4 requirement, are forced to do these carve-out exceptions. So our BCTC students who are 3-year students are eligible to have a reduction in some of their math science requirements. That gets a little more challenging for students who don't start at BCTC in their sophomore year. So I think it speaks to the constraints that we impose on those students and would be alleviated with this new proposal that focuses on their individual pathways.
Thanks, Mr. Campbell.
Anyone else want comments or questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Campbell. All right, so do you have something else, Dr.?
No, Dr. McClendon, I thank you as the chair of the committee for moving this on to the voting meeting on the 15th. I do think it's a good idea for in the education section of the workshop for Mr. Campbell to revisit that table slide, in particular for any board members who aren't able to attend. And I want to thank the board for their consideration of this. I really do think it, opens a door for us to really help our high school students achieve their post-secondary goals, whatever they may be. And so this is an important first step in continuing to move our high school forward. So thank you.
Right, and it was mentioned, but the 24 credits, that's the minimum. As Mr. Campbell said, we have students, the BCTC students, but also, other students who they will get more, more than 24 credits. So we're looking at just the minimum. If anybody's thinking, well, we're dropping down from 25 to 24, we're still, as they said, at the, above or at the same standard as number as other schools. But many of our students will get well beyond that 24 credits, so. Do you have anything?
I would just echo what Dr. Minor said as well. We're very excited about the flexibility and opportunities this proposal provides for our students. And ultimately, when we think about our long-term goals and wanting to have 100% of our students graduate and all of those other pieces that were discussed last month at the curriculum committee meeting. We feel like this is a very important first step, and certainly appreciate Mr. Campbell and Mrs. Harris's presentation this evening. And again, appreciate the board very much, your willingness to consider this and vote on it at the December meeting.
Okay, I think this is the shortest meeting ever, but so thank you all, for coming. Now, this is our second in-person meeting, but we are actually discussing, are we going to, for January, will we continue with in-person, or, might we consider Zoom, depending on what's going on, with the current situation with the virus and everything. So, but you would get an announcement about that. But I just want you to know we just got back to in-person, but we are talking about that possibility. So thank you all for coming. And that concludes our meeting.
Thanks, Dr. McClendon.